Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. Certainly have a lot to talk about here on our Thursday edition of Point of View. And we will, in the first hour, look at a number of issues in the news. National Guard being deployed to the southern border. What about that? I'll get some comments from a number of individuals. And then we'll get into the shooter at YouTube, if for no other reason, because there are some that have said there is no justification for her going to the headquarters at YouTube. But some of the things that concerned her concern other people. That's not a justification for anything she might do, so don't take that the wrong way. But we have for some time noticed how YouTube has been sort of heavy-handed on a number of different individuals, primarily conservatives, although she certainly didn't fit that category, so we want to talk about that for just a minute. Of course, since we are talking about deploying the troops to the southern border, just give you an update on that immigrant caravan, in particular looking at how various churches, primarily Catholic churches, but not exclusively, have been aiding those who have been seeking asylum. And we'll get into that conversation. And then, of course, we might just mention, of course, the teacher walkouts continue. And we'll get into a variety of other issues, in particular trade, although we're probably going to postpone most of that till the next hour. Michael Stumo is with us, and he is the Chief Executive Officer of the Coalition for a Prosperous America. Points out that actually some of the trade challenges and tariffs proposed by President Donald Trump are working. Some of them are devastating. The working, South Korea. So we'll talk about a success. And, of course, we'll talk about China. We'll get into some other issues on that. And, of course, for those of you that listen here locally, we do not air the third hour on the local Dallas station, but we do have a third hour. And Dave Ferguson will be with us in that third hour, Hero Maker. And you can maybe listen to that online. Of course, you can go to the YouTube channel and find it later. You can go to our website, pointofview.net, and listen or watch. Or you can even go to Facebook Live and watch it there as well. So there's just a variety of ways that you can keep up with us, and we hope that as you like some of the material that you find or would like to get more information about that, you'd go to our website, pointofview.net. And as you go there, if you can help us out financially, next week will be what we call Truth Team. And for many of you in the Dallas area, you've probably not been through one of these with us before. But I might mention we bring in all sorts of guests, and we're going to have a chance to hear from really kind of a who's who of individuals who have joined with us, number one, to help us understand some of the things going on in our world, but also then to join with us to ask you to support this ministry. And so we hope that you will continue listening next week as well as we go through our Truth Team week. Let me just, if I can, get to some of the facts here. This comes from the Washington Times. President Donald Trump signed an order yesterday deploying National Guard troops to the U.S.-Mexican border to boost security while he pressures Congress to deliver more resources to build his wall, hire more border patrol agents, and make it easier to deport new illegal immigrants. And you have the latest Homeland Security Secretary saying that it's just too early to know how many troops will be sent, what their exact role will be, or how much it will cost. But she did suggest that it will probably be along the lines of the deployments that have happened in the past under President George W. Bush and Barack Obama, which is a fact to remember as you begin to hear people say this is unprecedented. Well, actually, no, it is very precedented. We've had already the two previous presidents doing something very similar to this. The argument usually comes in two ways. the criticism either is this has never been done before. I think I've already answered that one. Or why now? After all, Mr. President, you've been telling us that the number of people coming here as illegal immigrants crossing the border is a smaller number. And I would say there's two issues that contradict that particular statement. Number one, that is true, that indeed we've had a decrease in the number of people that have come across the border illegally. That's due in part to a depressed economy. But, of course, that has changed. We have a booming economy. And more importantly, we also have this caravan that is coming our direction. So that's probably reason enough to say that we already have some that are coming, which we know about, and others who might come because of the economy. But there's another issue that hardly ever gets mentioned, but let's mention it, and that is this latest omnibus spending bill, which was passed, actually prohibits the president from building a wall. So the signal, I think, that is sent to anybody that is in the news, and again, I recognize some of the people crossing the border have no idea what's happening in Congress, but those who lead them sometimes do know that. Those individuals are well aware that right now, even though there's been a lot of huffing and puffing about building a wall, the reality is that wall's not up right now, so now might not be a bad time to cross over the border. So there's some very good arguments that you could make for why, indeed, we could send the National Guard. I'll get more into that in just a minute. But I wanted to, first of all, just have you hear from a few people that we've had on this program and see what they had to say. One of those is Representative Louis Gohmert. Matter of fact, I think we'll be hearing from him even next week, but in the next couple of weeks, I know we'll have a chance to hear from him. And he released this statement that came out just the other day from his office. He said, President Trump's announcement to defend the United States border with the National Guard troops is a sensible, prudent, and has plenty of prescience. President Obama did the same thing, as did President George W. Bush. So, again, there's an opportunity to talk about the fact that we have some kind of precedence in that regard. With reports of thousands of Central American migrants heading towards an illegal mass entrance across the U.S. border, which basically is an unauthorized invasion into this country, President Trump chose to stand with the American citizens and American law. Louis Gohmert went on to say that the move will not only aid in the defense of our law and our sovereignty, but it will also prevent gang members, drug smugglers, sex traffickers, and terrorists from hiding within civilian invaders, amidst what, of course, the former FBI director, James Comey, once testified happening in the past with Middle Eastern terrorists previously had done such activities as documented by the former FBI director. And Louis Gohmert goes on to say it will obviously also protect the Americans and support our unsung heroes in the Border Patrol stationed along our southern border. He also says it's critical to note that in March 102 years ago, a liberal Democrat, President Woodrow Wilson, ordered an estimated 75,000 National Guard troops to protect the same southern border after incursions across the U.S. border by Mexicans led by Pancho Villa. This effort placed National Guard military troops on our southern border 102 years ago, effectively sealed our border from further illegal raids into the United States. Though President Wilson also sent thousands of troops under the command of General John Pershing into Mexico itself to assure that our border's protection, which, of course, President Trump has no intention of doing. However, it is about time we effectively secure our border once again so that only those entering legally come in. And he said if a liberal Democrat president can do it, we know it can be done. Louis Gohmert has a lot of fun, and he did say some other things, but those are just a couple of key points. When we come back, I want to hear a little bit more from Gary Bauer, who will actually be with us next week as we do our Truth Team, and he's got some comments about what has been taking place at the border and whether or not a National Guard deployment is a good idea. What do you think? Should we deploy the National Guard? 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
During this election season, we will once again see how divided we are as a nation. We see a map of red and blue states and even have maps showing red and blue congressional districts. But there is growing evidence that we aren't just a divided country, we're essentially two countries living within the same border. Bill Bishop made this case many years ago in his book, The Big Sort. Americans have sorted themselves into various enclaves that are often so separate from each other that they might as well be different countries. Consider the fundamental differences between Democrats and Republicans. Democrats want to live by their own rules. They hang out with their friends at parks and at other public places. They think that religion and politics shouldn't mix. Democrats watch Sunday morning news shows and late-night television. Republicans go to church. They spend more time with family, get their news from Fox News or the radio, and own guns. Republicans read sports and home magazines, attend Bible study, frequently visit relatives, and talk about politics with people at church. They even differ on their preference of pets. Democrats are more likely to own cats. Republicans are more likely to own dogs. Michael Barone commented in one of his columns that most Americans choose to live in a place that is culturally congenial. Most people in the San Francisco Bay Area wouldn't consider living in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, even for much better money. Most Metroplexers would never relocate to the Bay Area. I lived in both places and can validate Michael Barone's conclusion. Yes, we're a divided country, but we're more than that. We are essentially two countries within the same border, hardly on speaking terms with each other. This is the challenge for any politician in America. Trying to bring people together is difficult when we're essentially two countries within the U.S. border. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Should we deploy a National Guard to the southern border of the United States? I'd love to get your comments. 1-800-351-1212. Had a chance to hear a little bit from Representative Louis Gohmert. Gary Bauer, of course, a good friend of ours with American Values. He'll be on the program with us next week. And he said the president yesterday caused liberals all over the country to set their hair on fire when he said the military would guard our borders. He says, I really don't know what the fuss is all about. Well, Gary, before I continue with your commentary, let me just give an illustration of some of the reaction to it. One immigrant rights activist called the move simplemente estúpida, which others said Mr. Trump, or President Trump, I guess is how we should say it, but they were saying Mr. Trump, baited the move because he saw the caravan of illegal immigrants. You think? That's at least one possibility. Another group with United We Dream said every member of the military sent to the border should know that we are being sent to satisfy the paranoid delusions of a madman. I think they're talking about the president there. This one said, Trump watched TV over the weekend, saw images of poor brown immigrants striving for a better life, and freaked out. And so those are just a couple of comments. I won't read some of the others because they use some words we can't use. At least the FCC would not allow us to use them, and my mother would not allow me to use them either, so we'll leave it at that. But Gary Bauer goes back and says, to begin with, President Ronald Reagan, President George Herbert Walker Bush, President Bill Clinton, President George W. Bush, and President Barack Obama deployed National Guard troops to assist the Border Patrol. So as you can see in that list, it's an even longer and more extensive list than even the one provided by Louis Gohmert. But he says, surely defending our borders is the primary reason we have a military at all. And so here Gary Bauer says this. Here's something else to keep in mind. We have been on a high state of alert ever since 9/11. That is why we have to take off our shoes and risk getting patted down in order to board an airplane. Yet the left insists that we can't stop unknown people from crossing our border. How can you reconcile these two things? Increasingly, the left's agenda is higher taxes, no guns, pay for my abortions, keep your faith in the closet, and keep the borders wide open. He says, wow, who couldn't like that? Can't wait to get Gary Bauer on next week to talk about this issue. He says, while we're on the subject of immigration, 17 states and 7 cities announced yesterday that they are joining in a second round of lawsuits against the president's plan to add a citizenship question to the 2020 census forms. I might get to that a little bit later. He says this is yet another example of the left's extremism. A new poll found that 66% of Americans believe the census should ask whether respondents are citizens. Just 25% oppose the question. Matter of fact, I think that number will go up as more and more people understand that this is a question we have been asking for many years on the long form and used to ask it routinely until it was truncated primarily to make the short form, because they found that sometimes people would not fill out a longer form. So that's why we have a short form and a long form. Short form, all of us get to fill out or have census takers ask us. The long form is for a selected group to get better demographics. And so that's, again, one of those facts that we'll get to in just a minute. And he said, while the left's going nuts defending illegal immigrants and open borders, I couldn't help but notice that the president's approval rating just popped 51%. That's not surprising since most Americans support the get-tough approach to illegal immigration. So Gary Bauer and Louis Gorman had some things to say about that. Lots of controversy, though, and so if you'd like to join us on this issue of the National Guard, we will certainly welcome those phone calls at 800-351-1212. Well, as we all know, a couple of days ago, we had this woman who opened fire inside the YouTube headquarters. And her complaints were this, that first of all, that the YouTube employees had really meddled with her YouTube videos, and so they were closed-minded. And then she also complained that they had demonetized her post. And so as a result, as we know, she drove from San Diego all the way up to San Bruno, California, to actually shoot people up. Now, we certainly know that she was mentally unstable, and we certainly do not justify any action that she or other people would ever take against YouTube, whether it is simply to stand outside the door and protest, or whether it is to do something that would try to hack into YouTube and the rest. But I thought for just a minute, I would at least acknowledge that some of her complaints have been heard by other individuals. And so there's a piece that we have put up that you can read, and it's entitled, Sadistic YouTube Deletes Channels, Demonetized, Censors Content, Refuses to Respond to Press. Well, I summarized it and just called it YouTube Censorship, and you can find it on our website. And it's written by Megan Fox. And Megan Fox says this: the news that a content creator who was demonetized and censored by YouTube snapped and went homicidal at the company's headquarters points to an ugly systemic problem. YouTube creators have been asking for over a year for YouTube to communicate honestly and fairly with its creators, demanding an explanation for why some channels are demonetized and others with similar content aren't. Now, the example Megan Fox could use is one we have talked about here, and that is from Dennis Prager, who's been on the program with us a couple of times before. Prager University does some outstanding videos, and matter of fact, some of those videos that he's doing now were ones that we, years ago, when we used to have kind of a little video channel, although now we still have the YouTube channel, but we used to produce videos, were very similar to some of his. If you'd like to see a sample, go to our website, pointofview.net. We still have the one on the Korean lights up. That one we kept up because we'd had the Olympics, and so there's just a sample of the kind of things we've done and he has done, and yet so far in the courts, he hasn't been able to get much movement, but we'll see where it goes when he goes on appeal. But the example that Megan Fox uses is Mandy O'Brien, and she's been kind of a body language channel person, has over 200,000 subscribers, so obviously very popular. She's funny and smart, provides good insight into human behavior, Megan Fox says. And while she seems to like Trump, her videos are not terribly political. Most of them center around breaking news stories, and she kind of reads the body language of individuals. Okay, her channel, Bombard's Body Language, was targeted for deletion by YouTube, and it all began when she actually began to do body language evaluation of some of the individuals, some of the students who were actually part of the Parkland shooting, who had survived it. And so she does some of this one girl who has not become very prominent, but talked about how whenever she would talk about she actually ran into the shooter, she would smile, and talked about how sometimes teenagers, they don't think about the fact they just about died. Instead, they think about, oh, I got to meet the celebrity, and so she talks about that. And then she did a body language, a video of David Hogg. Well, he turned out to be a real celebrity, but when she did it, this when we were all just meeting him for the very first time, and pointed out that, if anything, he was actually reacting very differently than the rest of the teenagers. Now, she let it slip at one point. She says, almost like a sociopath. He was mimicking what in this particular case, isn't it funny? It was Laura Ingram's interview with him. And so anyway, she probably used some, but she says, I don't think he's a sociopath, but it is interesting that unlike the other teenagers, he would react very differently than the rest. Well, YouTube said, well, he was bullying David Hogg, and of course he is untouchable right now in the liberal icons. And so the video was deleted. Fortunately, as you can tell, I was able to watch it and go, okay, it's not the way I would have said it, but nevertheless, she wasn't bullying. She actually didn't know that this guy was going to be kind of nationally famous. She was doing the video of just a few of these individuals that were being interviewed and helping us understand a little bit more about body language, because sometimes even when people try to portray one thing with their words, their bodies tell you something entirely different. Well, if nothing else, she talked about that, and so because the video was flagged as bullying, that gave her channel one strike. Shortly after that, another video of a Parkland shooting witness was flagged for the same issue, and pretty soon, guess what happened? You had strike two. And so then, in a bizarre twist, they flagged an old video she had made of an Australian woman accused of drug smuggling because O'Brien called her stupid. That was third strike, and the channel was deleted. She's fought the deletion, and YouTube reinstated her channel without the David Hogg video, but republished the other two. They offered no explanation for the change of heart other than just the visibility that was created by it. And it's just a reminder that YouTube right now, and again, it's a private company, so we can decide if we want to use YouTube or something else, but they pulled them, then they dropped them, then they added them, and it's just hard to sort of figure out how indeed some of those decisions are being made. But I think her problem was she actually started evaluating the body language of some of these people, in this particular case, teenagers who became kind of national figures, and that was enough to pull her videos. So again, no justification for what that YouTube shooter did, but at least an explanation for why some people are a bit frustrated. We'll take a break and come back with more right after this.
Point of View is committed to spreading the truth, oftentimes a truth that those in political power don't like getting heard. But the only way it can be heard is if our teams stand strong together, if you do what you can to support the Point of View Truth Team. It's having an impact, as we heard recently from U.S. Representative Louis Gohmert.
Everywhere I go, I hear people that you have influenced, that Point of View has affected. You have made such a difference, and you rely on people to contribute, and if they don't contribute, then that truth does not get heard.
Help Point of View make a difference. Pray and consider what level is right for you. $30, $65, $100 a month, or even more. Please do what you can. 1-800-347-5151, or visit online, pointofview.net. Look near the top right for the link that says Become a Monthly Partner. Join the Truth Team. 800-347-5151. and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, let's get back to the issue of immigration. As a matter of fact, just a minute ago, I did the one on YouTube and body language just to break it up, because as I predicted earlier this week, and even a little bit last week, but certainly by Monday of this week, it was pretty obvious that we're going to be doing a lot more conversation about immigration. And so as a result, I just every once in a while wanted to talk about something other than that, because it's going to probably dominate the news. And while we talk about immigration for just a minute, this is isn't about a dislike of individuals. You know, the claim that Donald Trump has animus towards people with brown complexions, maybe he does, I don't know. I've never met the man, don't know him. That's not our concern. Whether a person comes here from another country, whether it's Germany or Canada or China, and they come here on a visa and they overstay their visa, whether somebody comes from El Salvador, Guatemala, Mexico, and they cross the border, however it is that they're here, we still need a rule of law. We have 1 million people that are let in every year through legal immigration. But in the past, we've had times when we've had that many people come in here under illegal immigration. And the argument that is always made is well, we just have 11 million people here that are undocumented or are here illegally. Matter of fact, you're not even allowed to say illegal immigrants, but, you know, that's the reality. And as we'll talk about a little bit later this hour, or maybe in one of the other programs, when you look at the census question about whether or not you're a citizen, again, those are important issues because I think we are talking about a lot more than 11 million people in this country. And if you're bringing in 1 million people every year legally, and then bringing in the past, sometimes 1 million people here illegally, and they are then being exploited because obviously they are going to be somewhat in the shadows. They're going to have to get a phony Social Security card if they want to work. They are going to have to find some ways to get benefits if they aren't working. And as a result, they could actually work in places where there's no coverage for them in terms of disability or workman's comp or all of the rest. There are just a lot of reasons why we need to solve our immigration issue, and yet, of course, Congress has not. And we can lay blame on all the presidents, all the parties, all the individuals, but the reality is it's what we have right now. Now, the reason for the movement of these National Guard troops to the border has a lot to do with this caravan. So let me go back to Gary Bauer for just a minute. Then I also want to quote from another piece by Michelle Malcolm that gets into that as well. And that is, Gary Bauer says the caravan of more than 1,000 migrants from Central America is now about 400 miles into Mexico. He says, as I noted yesterday, the caravan is being organized by a group called People Without Borders, Pueblo Sin Fronteras, if you would like to hear the Spanish word of it. And that is chaos. And he said last week the organizers issued a list of demands, and he lists those there, to the governments of Central America, Mexico, and the United States. And he said, by the way, some made sense, like an end to corruption. Well, as I would say to our neighbors south of the border, you first, because the corruption in the police in Mexico far outstrips any possible corruption of police in the United States. But okay. But then once you get past some of those that make some sense, then you have a demand to end violence against LGBTQIA community. First of all, he says, I wonder how many of the marching refugees could identify all the words in that acronym. Other demands specifically to the United States government, or basically to you as the taxpayers, were, quote, that they recognize our right to dignified work, unquote. Another one that, quote, they open the borders to us because we are as much citizens as the people of the countries where we are and or travel, unquote. In other words, they're demanding that we recognize them as citizens and provide them with jobs. But I think Gary Bauer has a good question. What about the jobs for America's actual citizens? And he says President Trump's strong rhetoric over the weekend got the attention of the Mexican government, which announced yesterday that it was planning to halt and disband the caravan. Of course, I talked about that yesterday. Whether or not that is the case, I don't know. Right now, it seems like some of the organizers are defiant. Many of them denounced President Trump and actually vowed to press on. And in the White House press that actually took place yesterday, President Trump said that our immigration laws are so weak and so pathetic, it's like we have no border. Gary Bauer says, sadly, he's right. The good news is that his administration, against massive resistance from the left, is taking steps to change that. Attorney General Jeff Sessions has ordered immigration judges to speed up deportation hearings in order to clear a backlog of cases that tripled during the years when President Obama was in office. This is a big step towards ending what we've oftentimes called catch and release. And the president, of course, also announced the guarding of the border with our military. And so, again, you can see that that is the case, where, again, we might be able to provide some minimum amount of protection. And if nothing else, Gary Bauer concludes by saying, the caravan is a perfect example of everything that's wrong with our immigration policies. It is because of our lax immigration laws that thousands and thousands of people think they can enter the United States and demand rights, citizenship, and jobs. It's also a good example why we need a serious border wall. And he says, by the way, 89% of Border Patrol agents whose job is to police the border believe that a wall system in strategic locations is necessary to securing our border. So when you ask the people at the border whose job it is to protect the border, 89% of them say that that is exactly what we need, a wall system in strategic locations, they say, necessary to securing the border. Now, on Monday, I mentioned the fact that this caravan is pushed in part by some of these church groups. And this is one of the things Michelle Malkin points out, because even when this was put together, this particular group against the borders, Pueblo Sin Fronteras, actually used this caravan, and it launched it during Holy Week, March 25th, you might remember, by invoking the Stations of the Cross. They even have some biblical costumes. Some of them had crosses and the rest. And so she talks about what is happening in some of the churches around the country. This is where I would call for people in these churches to kind of think about, obviously we want to be kind and compassionate to anyone that comes to this country, whether here legally or illegally, whether they're of the same race, nationality, religion, whatever. Understand that. But at the other side of that, the Bible also talks about having law and order and obeying those in authority. And in many cases, these churches have turned into houses of sanctuary. So we not only have sanctuary cities and sanctuary states, we now have sanctuary churches. For example, she says in Colorado, 5 illegal aliens have taken sanctuary in houses of worship in the safe spaces of Mancos, Denver, Carbondale, and Boulder, and more than in any other state. Goes on to talk about that one. Let's jump to another state. In the state of Washington, in Washington State, the St. Joseph Catholic Church of the Seattle blasted President Trump's destructive and brutal immigration. In Manhattan's Upper West Side, you have the Fourth Universalist Society harboring a mother and her family who've lived here illegally for more than a dozen years and want to flout those deportation orders. Springfield, Massachusetts, the South Congregational Church is shielding a Peruvian woman and 2 children who were facing deportation. You can go to Las Vegas, Nevada, and the incoming Catholic bishop there announced that illegal immigration and gun control will be his top spiritual agendas. How about the gospel? Oh, well, forget that. That's not going to happen. And then on a couple of other cases, she gives examples. In San Diego, for example, Catholic and Episcopal leaders united to protest the construction of a border wall while waving Mexican flags. And they argued that Jesus said we should love our neighbor. I would agree with loving our neighbor, but now we have a phenomenon in which we don't just have sanctuary cities and sanctuary states. We're starting to see more and more sanctuary churches and houses of worship. So once again, we're seeing how that is going to be another one of those topics we'll probably be dealing with in the near future. We need to take a break. When we come back, let me just real briefly talk about the census question about citizenship, because we do have some facts and figures related to that. And once again, it is easy to say we can't have this question because it's going to drive people away, until you realize that we've had a lot of people that never would fill out the form anyway, even before it ever asked the question about citizenship, because if you're here illegally, you're afraid that even filling out a form, even answering a question from a census taker might put you into jeopardy. So we'll get into that conversation and also recognize that the claim that this would cause the blue states to lose representation is not well-founded at all. As a matter of fact, there's good evidence that actually some of the red states could lose representation if indeed that was used to count those people that are here. But, of course, it's not going to be used that way. We'll explain that right after these important messages.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Veterans Memorials are symbols meant to remind the living of the service and sacrifice the fallen made for freedom. That is why Gold Star Mothers in 1919 started work on the Bladensburg World War I Veterans Memorial. They did not want the world to forget the sacrifice their sons made, so they, along with the American Legion, erected a cross-shaped memorial. The design mirrored the universally accepted symbol erected over the thousands of graves of men who died in Europe defending freedom. No one complained for almost 100 years. Recently, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit refused to overturn an opinion of a panel of that court that would direct a federal district court to consider whether the monument should have its horizontal arms removed or be razed to the ground completely. Such a decision sets a dangerous precedent for veterans memorials across America. If this decision stands, other memorials will be targeted for destruction as well. First Liberty Institute will appeal this case to the U.S. Supreme Court on behalf of its clients, the American Legion. I encourage you to go to don'ttearmedown.com and join us in defending this memorial to the 49 men of Prince George's County, Maryland, killed in the line of duty during World War I. We forget what we do not see. Unless the Supreme Court intervenes, the Bladensburg Memorial and similar memorials in close by Arlington National Cemetery may disappear as well. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. I hope you enjoyed this episode of First Liberty Briefing. You can learn more amazing stories about how everyday Americans are standing up and saving religious freedom. Just visit firstliberty.org. You'll be inspired, educated, and informed. Visit firstliberty.org right now.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
After a few more minutes, if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Of course, we also suggest that if you'd like to leave a comment or a question, you can also do that with our YouTube channel. And one of the questions came from somebody that said, and I won't say her name, I'm bipolar, and I'm a little concerned about this because, after all, we sometimes see these mentally unstable individuals going and shooting others. And first of all, let's just be honest. Even individuals that have a mental disorder, they're much more likely to harm themselves than to harm another individual. So in most cases, that's not going to be, I think, a backlash that's going to really happen. I certainly have great sympathy for people with bipolar. Having a mother-in-law that was, having a family member that is, so I can really relate to that. I don't think that's an issue, unless you're dealing with somebody who's very paranoid, schizophrenic, has acted out before and threatened. I think we're not going to see a backlash against people with any kind of mental challenge whatsoever, but it's, something to pay attention to, and that's why I always like to be careful to say we do know sometimes the profile of those shooters, but there are individuals that break that profile, and the shooter in YouTube shooter is a good example. Almost all of them are men. Well, she was a woman, so there's a good example. Almost all of the ones that have attacked churches, for example, have been atheists. Well, what about this young boy that built those bombs in Austin, Texas? He went to a church, and so, and wanted to go on a mission. So there are exceptions, but the rules, I think, are important. One of the questions Maria was asking, how do the lower courts even have authority to rule against the president's actions? And that is a good question. I never approved of that when it was used during the Bush administration to prevent him from doing certain things, because what would happen is liberals would then go and judge shop and find a judge that was liberal enough to strike down something the president did. And how can one federal judge strike down the actions of a president, or even strike down the actions of a duly elected Congress that passed the bill in the House, the Senate, and signed it by the president? But nevertheless, that was the case. And so I did kind of smile a little bit when we had a Texas judge strike down one of the actions of President Barack Obama. I thought, I'm glad that at least the liberals occasionally got to see what we deal with all the time. And, of course, that only lasted for a short period of time, because now what, again, we see is a federal judge in sometimes even an obscure location can rule against the president, and then at the very least, if not strike down the law, at least suspend it until it goes to the circuit court or the Supreme Court. I wish there were some ways to resolve that. Unfortunately, that is not the case. And one of the other questions about rule of law is that we have all sorts of examples of individuals that break the rule of law, or where there's exceptions to it. And as I've said on this program so many times, whether it's ethics, which I write about, or law, you don't make good laws by looking at the exceptions. You don't make good ethics by looking at the exceptions. But nevertheless, I love what he says there. The devil points out these cases to make the law-abiding look bad. And, of course, what you're seeing right now is sometimes we get false information. We've talked about this on the program before, that you saw all these posts about this man who had served in the military who was going to be deported. And he said he had served for his country, until you read the rest of the story and find out that he had been involved in everything from drug smuggling to trying to even sell a case of cocaine to a drug agent. And, okay. And by the way, he was never here legally in the first place. So you sometimes have to dig into the stories a little bit. When you hear these stories of, for example, this Peruvian family that says we don't want to be removed and sent back to Peru. And so they're in the the South Congregational Church there in Springfield, Massachusetts. We have to know a little bit more about that to recognize why that was pulled in the first place. Either you believe in the rule of law or you don't. And so that is certainly one of those very important cases. And since we've been talking about immigration, let's conclude by talking about this survey. The Constitution mandates a survey of Americans every decade. It's in the Constitution. Every 10 years, supposed to do a survey, basically a census. The Commerce Secretary, for more than a century, has had the discretion over the questions that the census takers must ask. In most administrations, that would be the end of it, but not in the Trump administration, because just about everything in the Trump administration is considered to be controversial. Now, why is this census, in this particular case, supposed to have a question about citizenship? Well, that actually doesn't even come from the Commerce Secretary. It comes from the Justice Department. The Justice Department asked census officials to include a question about citizenship so that they can better enforce what's called the Voting Rights Act. Now, I think we should get rid of the Voting Rights Act. It was implemented at a time when we were using various kinds of gerrymandered districts, trying to use Jim Crow laws to prevent African Americans from voting. Is that a problem today? Well, some race baiters will say that, but most people wouldn't say that. And so that's why they want to include the question, because of the Voting Rights Act. And yet, of course, you've had all these lawsuits that have come from California, the attorneys general there in New York, and a variety of others. And they argue that asking this question would cause an undercount of the people in blue states and affect congressional representation. Well, the administration has never said that we wouldn't count those people. Think about during slavery. We counted even slaves. Now, they were only counted as 3/5. And we can get into the reason why that was and all the rest. But we even counted them. So to tell me that you're not going to count people that are here illegally is fallacious at its heart. But even if you believe that, look at the cities and the towns right now that have very high illegal immigrants, and a lot of them are red states. I used those the other day. McAllen, Texas, over 10%. Yuma, Arizona, over 10%. Gainesville, Georgia, over 10%. So that's, first of all, a bad argument. It's an inaccurate argument, and it isn't really one that is even germane to the discussion. The other one, of course, is that there is a fear that illegal immigrants will not fill out the U.S. Census forms. Well, we've found that with the long form, that most individuals will fill those out, even though it has citizenship question on there. The bigger problem is trying to get illegal immigrants to fill out the short form. They didn't fill it out before when the citizenship question was not there. So, you could make the case that maybe a few more wouldn't fill it out now that citizenship question is on there, but you couldn't get them to fill it out in the first place. So if you show that there's an undercount there, it's because they didn't fill it out in the first place. And our liberal friends always like to say, why can't we be like other countries? Oh, you mean like Australia, United Kingdom? All of them have a citizenship question on their census. So if we want to, as they always like to tell us, be like those other countries in Europe and other parts around the world, well, then, indeed, let's do it. And we've, of course, had the citizenship question on since the 1960s. We took it off for a while just simply to truncate the form and make it easier to fill out and shorter to fill out. But if the Justice Department thinks that it needs more data on the location of voters for a fair enforcement of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, then why not? Because after all, theoretically, only citizens are supposed to be allowed to vote, which is why it would be important to know whether you're a citizen or not and where you're located. I can try to make a better case, but if you're not convinced, I'm not sure any more facts or figures or historical perspective is going to make any difference. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to spend some time talking with Michael Strumo, and he is the Chief Executive Officer of the Coalition for a Prosperous America. We're going to talk about these tariffs and Donald Trump and a success, maybe South Korea, and a real fear, China. So we'll talk about all of that right after these important messages.
Rebecca Hagelin has been influencing public policy as an author, columnist, and executive at places like the Heritage Foundation for more than 30 years, and Point of View Radio stoked her fire.
I used to turn it on every day, and when my husband would come home from work, I would say, this is what they said on Point of View today, and this is what they said. I just wanted to be connected into the places where I could make a difference.
Rebecca has made a big difference with her life, and let's just say she's a big fan.
There's no better resource, there's no better truth sayer, there's no better place to go for information for people who are worthy of their money than Point of View.
Point of View makes a difference by inspiring and informing people who make a difference. And you can make a difference today when you invest in the Truth Team. Join us today. Find out how by calling 1-800-347-5151 or visit online pointofview.net/team. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team.
Point of View will continue after this.